Jessica and I had been married for 9 years, and I thought I knew her like the back of my hand. She was the type of woman who could light up a room just by walking into it, effortlessly charming, confident, and full of life. And for the longest time, I thought I was the luckiest man alive. But one seemingly innocent conversation changed everything. It was a quiet Wednesday evening, and we were having dinner in our small but cozy dining room. The sound of the rain tapping against the window added to the serenity of the moment. Jessica had made her signature pasta, and I was savoring it, thinking about how good life felt. Then she dropped a bombshell that I never saw coming. "So," she said, swirling her fork around her plate, "I got an invitation to Brad's party this weekend." I stopped chewing and blinked at her. "Brad?" She nodded, looking almost amused by my reaction. "Yeah, Brad. You know, my ex from college. He's hosting a get-together for some old friends. It's been years, and I think it might be nice to catch up." My chest tightened. Brad. The name alone brought an uncomfortable mix of jealousy and insecurity bubbling to the surface. I knew about him, of course. Jessica had mentioned him a few times early in our relationship, how they dated for 3 years, how he was her first love, and how he'd left her heartbroken when he moved across the country for a job. I never thought I'd have to think about him again, let alone hear that she wanted to go to his party. I set my fork down and leaned back in my chair, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why would you want to go to your ex's party? That seems odd, doesn't it?" Jessica tilted her head, her expression softening. "It's not a big deal. He's just an old friend now. Besides, a lot of people from college are going. It'll be fun to see everyone again." "But why now? You haven't spoken to him in years, have you?" Her hesitation before answering was barely noticeable, but I caught it. "No, not really. But he reached out last week. Said he wanted to reconnect with everyone." I felt the air grow heavier around us. "Jessica, you know how I feel about this. I'm not comfortable with you going." Her smile faded, replaced by a look of confusion. "Eric, it's just a party. I don't see why you're making this into such a big deal." "It's not about the party," I replied, my voice firmer now. "It's about the fact that he's your ex. It feels disrespectful to me. Can't you see how this might make me feel?" Jessica sighed and pushed her plate away, folding her arms. "Eric, I'm not asking for your permission. I'm telling you that I'm going. You can choose to trust me or not, but this isn't up for debate." I stared at her, stunned. This wasn't the woman I thought I knew. Jessica had always been considerate of my feelings, or at least, I thought she had. Now, she was brushing off my concerns like they didn't matter. The rest of the evening passed in strained silence. I tried to reason with her again, but she wouldn't budge. She said it was just a party, and that I was overreacting. Maybe I was. Or maybe my gut was trying to tell me something I didn't want to hear. When Saturday rolled around, Jessica dressed up in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. She wore a red dress that hugged her figure perfectly, her hair cascading down her back in soft waves. She looked stunning, but the sight of her heading out the door to see Brad made my stomach churn. "Don't wait up," she said with a smile, as if nothing was wrong. And just like that, she was gone. I spent the evening in a haze of unease. I couldn't focus on anything. TV, books, even the pile of work I had been meaning to catch up on. My mind kept going back to that red dress, her dismissive tone, and the way she'd brushed off my feelings. That night, I barely slept. My mind was racing with questions. Was I being paranoid? Or was there something more to this party than she was letting on? When Jessica came home the next morning, I thought she'd at least acknowledge my discomfort or try to ease my concerns. Instead, she acted like nothing had happened. "Morning," she said cheerfully, pouring herself a cup of coffee. I stared at her, waiting for an explanation, an apology, anything. But she just went about her morning routine like everything was fine. And that's when I decided, if she could ignore my feelings so easily, I'd do the same. I stopped engaging with her. No good mornings, no small talk, no effort. For a week, I acted like she didn't exist. At first, she didn't seem to notice. But as the days passed, I saw her growing more frustrated, more confused. By the end of the week, the tension in our home was palpable. I knew I couldn't keep it up forever, but I needed her to understand what she had done to me, how deeply her actions had hurt. What I didn't know was that the truth behind that party would be far more devastating than I could have imagined. The silence between us lingered like a heavy fog, filling every corner of our home. Jessica tried to act normal at first, as if my sudden shift in behavior was just a phase. But by the 5th day of me ignoring her, the cracks in her composure started to show. "Eric," she said one evening, her voice strained, "how long are you planning to keep this up?" I glanced at her briefly, then went back to scrolling through my phone, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a response. "This is childish," she continued, crossing her arms as she leaned against the kitchen counter. "You're not even telling me what's wrong. How am I supposed to fix it if you won't talk to me?" Fix it? The irony of her words stung. She knew exactly what was wrong. She just didn't want to acknowledge it. I finally put my phone down and looked at her, my voice calm but firm. "You already know, Jessica. You just don't want to admit it." Her eyes narrowed, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "This is about Brad's party, isn't it? Eric, I told you, it was nothing. Just a chance to catch up with old friends. Why can't you let it go?" I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. "Because it wasn't just about the party, Jessica. It was about how you completely dismissed my feelings. I told you I wasn't comfortable with you going, and you didn't care. You went anyway, dressed to the nines, and then acted like everything was fine the next day." Jessica's face softened for a moment, and I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes. But just as quickly, her defensive walls went back up. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said, her tone clipped. "You're acting like I cheated on you or something." I held her gaze, my stomach twisting. "Did you?" Her jaw dropped, and for a split second, she looked genuinely hurt. "How could you even ask me that?" "Because I don't know what to think anymore," I said, my voice rising slightly. "You've been distant, dismissive, and secretive. And you expect me to just sit here and believe everything's fine?" Jessica sighed and ran a hand through her hair, clearly exasperated. "Eric, I can't believe we're even having this conversation. Nothing happened. Okay? If you don't trust me, that's your problem, not mine." She stormed out of the room, leaving me sitting there with a gnawing sense of unease. Her reaction didn't ease my doubts, it only deepened them. The next day, I decided I needed clarity. I couldn't keep living in this fog of uncertainty. Jessica left her phone charging in the kitchen while she took a shower, and I stared at it for what felt like an eternity. I'd never gone through her phone before. I always believed in respecting her privacy. But this time, my gut was screaming at me that something wasn't right. With shaking hands, I unlocked her phone. She'd never changed the passcode, and opened her messaging app. At first, it was just the usual. Text from her coworkers, her mom, a group chat with her friends. But then I saw his name, Brad. My heart raced as I opened the thread. Most of the messages were short and casual, plans for the party, updates on who was coming. But one message, sent late at night after the party, made my blood run cold. "Had a great time catching up with you. It felt just like old times. Can't stop thinking about it." And then, her reply. "Me too. Let's not wait so long to see each other again." I sat there, frozen, as the weight of her words sank in. Just like old times? What exactly had happened at that party? I closed the app and set the phone back where I found it, my mind reeling. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I knew she'd deny everything. No, I needed more than a suspicious text. I needed proof. That evening, I couldn't even look at her. Jessica noticed, of course. She always noticed. "Eric, are you seriously still upset?" she asked, her voice tinged with annoyance. I forced a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. "No, I'm fine. Just tired from work." She didn't push further, but I could tell she didn't believe me. Over the next few days, I began to pay closer attention to her behavior. The late nights at work, the sudden bursts of texting, the way she seemed to guard her phone more closely than before. It all felt too coincidental to ignore. And then, one night, I overheard her on the phone. "I can't talk right now," she whispered, her voice low but urgent. "I'll call you later." She ended the call quickly, but I'd heard enough to confirm my suspicions. The question was no longer if something had happened. The question was, what was I going to do about it? After hearing Jessica's whispered phone call, my mind spiraled into chaos. The pieces were falling into place, but I still didn't have the full picture. The cryptic text messages, the guarded phone calls, the way she brushed off my feelings, it all pointed to one thing. Yet, I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling while Jessica slept soundly beside me. She looked peaceful, her chest rising and falling with each breath, but all I could feel was a growing void between us. I was consumed by the thought that the woman I had built my life with might be lying to me. The next morning, I decided I needed answers. But I also knew Jessica was too clever to slip up easily. I had to be smart about this. Subtle. I started observing her more closely, paying attention to the small details I'd previously ignored. Jessica had always been an open book, or at least that's what I thought. But now, everything she did felt calculated, like she was hiding something in plain sight. Her phone became her constant companion. She'd always been glued to it, but now she never left it unattended. Even when she went to the bathroom, it was always in her hand. And then there were the unexplained work dinners that started popping up on her calendar. Another late meeting tonight? I asked one evening as she slipped on her coat. Yeah, she replied casually, not meeting my eyes. We're brainstorming for the new campaign, and it's easier to do it over dinner. Who's going? She hesitated for a fraction of a second, but it was enough to make my stomach twist. Just the team. You know, the usual people. I nodded, forcing a smile. Have fun. She smiled back, but there was something off about it. Something that didn't reach her eyes. As soon as she left, I grabbed my car keys and followed her. I parked a block away from the restaurant she'd mentioned and waited. It wasn't long before I spotted her walking toward the entrance, but she wasn't alone. Brad was with her. They laughed as they walked side by side, his hand resting lightly on her lower back. My chest tightened at the sight. It was one thing to suspect something was going on, but seeing it with my own eyes felt like a punch to the gut. I sat in my car, torn between barging into the restaurant and walking away. Confronting them now would only give her an opportunity to deny everything. I needed more than a few stolen moments in a parking lot. The next day, I made a decision that felt both desperate and necessary. I hired a private investigator. I'd never imagined I'd resort to something like this, but I couldn't keep living in this limbo. The investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Kate, assured me she'd get to the bottom of it. Give me a week, she said. If there's something to find, I'll find it. Those 7 days felt like an eternity. Jessica's behavior didn't change. If anything, she seemed happier, lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Meanwhile, I was drowning in my own thoughts, wondering what Kate would uncover. When the call finally came, my heart pounded as I answered. I've got something for you, Kate said, her tone calm but serious. I met her at her office that afternoon, my palms slick with sweat. She handed me a manila envelope, her expression unreadable. It's all in there, she said. Photos, timestamps, everything you need. I took the envelope with trembling hands, unsure if I wanted to know the truth. But when I opened it, there was no going back. The first photo showed Jessica and Brad at a bar, sitting far too close for comfort. Her hand was on his arm, his on her knee. The next photo was even worse. They were kissing in a dimly lit corner, oblivious to the world around them. My stomach churned as I flipped through the images. There was no mistaking what was happening. This wasn't just a friendly catch-up. This was betrayal, plain and simple. When I got home that evening, Jessica was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. She turned to me with a smile, but it faltered when she saw my expression. Eric? What's wrong? I set the envelope on the counter and slid it toward her. Why don't you tell me? Her eyes darted to the envelope, then back to me. What is this? Open it, I said, my voice cold and steady. Jessica hesitated, but eventually, she pulled out the photos. Her face went pale as she flipped through them, her hands trembling. Eric, Don't, I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. Don't lie to me, Jessica. I've seen enough. Tears welled in her eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy. Not after everything she'd done. I can explain, she said weakly. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, I'm sure you can, but I don't think I want to hear it. For the first time, Jessica looked genuinely scared. But it wasn't fear of losing me. It was fear of losing control. And in that moment, I realized just how little I truly knew the woman I had married. Jessica stood frozen in the kitchen, clutching the photos like they might vanish if she held them tight enough. Her face was pale, her lips trembling as she tried to form words, but nothing coherent came out. I didn't give her the chance to start spinning excuses. Explain? You think there's an explanation for this? I said, my voice cracking under the weight of my emotions. For sneaking around with him? For lying to me, again and again? Her eyes filled with tears, and she finally managed to stammer. It wasn't what it looks like. Eric, please, just let me explain. Don't insult me, Jessica, I said, my tone colder now. I don't need an explanation. I need the truth. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I'd just sit here and ignore the signs? She stepped closer, reaching for my arm, but I pulled away. The touch I had once craved now felt like poison. Eric, please, she whispered, her voice breaking. It didn't mean anything. Brad reached out and I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared of how you'd react. Scared of how I'd react? I repeated, laughing bitterly. You were scared? What about how I feel now? What about the fact that you lied to my face and dismissed my feelings at every turn? Do you even care about that? Her silence was deafening. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The pain in my chest felt unbearable, like someone had reached in and ripped my heart out. I gave you everything, Jessica, I said, my voice quieter now. 9 years of loyalty, love, and trust. And you threw it all away for what? For him? It's not like that, she said, shaking her head. It was a mistake, Eric. I didn't mean for it to happen. A mistake, I repeated, my jaw tightening. Kissing him was a mistake. Meeting up with him behind my back was a mistake. But a string of deliberate choices isn't a mistake, Jessica. It's a betrayal. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Jessica tried to talk to me, but I couldn't bear to look at her, let alone listen to her excuses. I spent hours pacing the living room, my mind replaying every moment of the last few weeks, searching for the signs I had missed. The truth was, they had always been there. The late nights, the guarded phone calls, the way she'd started pulling away from me emotionally. I just hadn't wanted to see them. I had convinced myself that we were okay, that our marriage was strong enough to withstand anything. But now, that illusion was shattered. The next morning, Jessica sat at the kitchen table, her face pale and drawn. She had barely slept, and it showed. I walked past her without a word, pouring myself a cup of coffee and staring out the window, lost in thought. Eric, she said softly, breaking the silence. I didn't respond. Please, she said, her voice trembling. Can we just talk? I know I've hurt you, but I want to fix this. I want to fix us. I turned to her, my expression unreadable. Fix this? Jessica, this isn't a leaky faucet. You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed the trust we built over 9 years. Do you even understand what you've done? Tears streamed down her face, and she nodded. I do. I know I've messed up, Eric. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I love you. I love us. I don't want to lose you. Her words, as desperate as they were, felt hollow. I couldn't tell if she truly meant them or if she was just afraid of the consequences of her actions. Love isn't enough, Jessica, I said, my voice steady but firm. Love doesn't excuse betrayal. Love doesn't erase the pain you've caused. She broke down, sobbing into her hands, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the photos, the messages, and the lies, and the flicker of sympathy vanished. Over the next few days, I distanced myself even more. I stayed late at work, avoided her calls, and barely spoke to her when we were in the same room. Jessica tried everything to get through to me. Apologies, tears, promises to change, but I couldn't bring myself to believe her. The weight of her betrayal hung over me like a storm cloud, suffocating and relentless. I knew I couldn't go on like this, but I also wasn't ready to make any decisions. And then, a week later, Something happened that changed everything. I was at work when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You deserve to know the whole truth. Meet me at the coffee shop on 5th at 6 p.m. My heart skipped a beat. Who was this? And what truth were they talking about? Against my better judgment, I decided to go. I had to. At 6 p.m. sharp, I walked into the coffee shop, my palms slick with sweat. I scanned the room, my eyes landing on a familiar face. It was Brad. Seeing Brad sitting at the corner table made my stomach churn. He looked too casual, too confident, like he had no idea about the damage he'd caused. Or worse, like he didn't care. I hesitated for a moment before walking over, every step feeling heavier than the last. Brad, I said, my voice tight. What do you want? He looked up, a smug smile spreading across his face. Eric, glad you came. Sit down. I didn't want to sit. I wanted to grab him by the collar and demand answers, but I forced myself to stay calm. I pulled out the chair across from him and sat, my jaw clenched. What is this about? I asked. Brad leaned back in his chair, looking entirely too relaxed. I thought you deserved to know the truth. Jessica? She didn't tell you everything, did she? I stared at him, my heart pounding. What are you talking about? He sighed, shaking his head like he pitied me. Jessica and I, we've been in touch for a while now. The party wasn't the first time we reconnected. I felt the blood drain from my face. How long? A few months, he admitted, his tone unapologetic. It started with some harmless messages. Then we met for coffee. One thing led to another. My fists clenched under the table. Why are you telling me this? Brad smirked. Because she's been lying to both of us. She told me she was unhappy with you, that you were distant, and that she didn't feel loved anymore. But then she kept pulling away from me, too. I thought we had something real, but now I'm not so sure. His words felt like knives cutting into me. I didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal itself, or the fact that Jessica had been spinning lies about me to justify her actions. I don't need your pity, I said, my voice cold. And I don't care about your sob story. If you're trying to paint yourself as a victim, you're wasting your time. Brad's smirk faded, and for the first time, he looked slightly uncomfortable. I just thought you should know the kind of woman you're dealing with. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. And now, I know who you are, too. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, the sound of my heartbeat drowning out everything else. That night, I sat in my car for hours, parked in a lot a few blocks from home. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, betrayal, heartbreak. Brad's words replayed over and over in my head, each one more painful than the last. When I finally went home, Jessica was waiting for me in the living room, her face pale and anxious. Where were you? She asked, her voice trembling. I didn't answer. Instead, I looked her in the eye and said, I met Brad. Her face fell, and for a moment, she looked truly terrified. You did what? He told me everything, Jessica, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. The texts, the meetings, the lies. All of it. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. I want the truth, I said, stepping closer. Not your excuses, not your apologies. Just the truth. Did you ever plan to tell me? Or was this your idea of love all along? Her silence was deafening. Jessica stared at me, her face pale and her lips trembling, but she didn't say a word. The silence was unbearable, and for a moment, I thought she might just walk away, leaving me to piece together the wreckage on my own. Say something, I demanded, my voice rising. Anything, Jessica. I deserve to know why you did this. Why him? Why now? She lowered her gaze, her hands twisting nervously. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. I never meant to hurt you, Eric. I scoffed, shaking my head. You never meant to hurt me? You've been lying to me for months, Jessica. You've been meeting up with your ex, sneaking around behind my back, and I'm supposed to believe you didn't mean to hurt me? It started out innocent, she said quickly, as if rushing to justify herself. When Brad reached out, it was just small talk, catching up. I didn't think it would go any further. But it did, I said coldly. Didn't it? She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I don't know what I was thinking. I felt nostalgic. Talking to him brought back memories of a time when life felt simpler, less complicated. But I swear, Eric, I never stopped loving you. Loving me? I snapped, my voice filled with disbelief. You call this love? Sneaking around, lying, betraying me? That's not love, Jessica. That's selfishness. She sank into the couch, her hands covering her face as she sobbed. I was stupid. I got caught up in the past, and I didn't realize how far I'd gone until it was too late. I stood there, my heart pounding, torn between the desire to yell and the urge to walk away. And what about Brad? Was it just emotional, or did it go further? Jessica froze, her sobs quieting. She looked up at me, her expression filled with dread. Eric, it wasn't just emotional. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. My legs felt weak, and I had to steady myself against the armrest of the chair. How many times? I asked, my voice barely audible. She shook her head, fresh tears streaming down her face. It only happened once. At the party. I didn't plan for it, but we'd both been drinking and I held up a hand to stop her, not wanting to hear the details. My stomach churned at the thought of her with him, the man who had once been her everything. So what now? I asked after a long pause, my voice hollow. You've told me the truth, or at least part of it. Do you expect me to forgive you? Pretend like none of this ever happened? Jessica stood, her hands clasped together as if begging. I don't expect anything, Eric. I know I've destroyed your trust, and I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. I just don't want to lose you. Her words hung in the air, but they felt empty. She wanted to save our marriage, but how could I rebuild something so thoroughly broken? That night, I slept in the guest room, unable to even look at her. My mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. Every part of me wanted to leave, to walk away from the betrayal and start over. But then there was the weight of 9 years of marriage, of shared memories and promises. The next morning, I made my decision. Jessica, I said, standing in the kitchen as she sipped her coffee, her eyes swollen from crying. We need space. I'm going to stay with my brother for a while. Her face crumpled, and she set her mug down with a trembling hand. Eric, please don't do this. We can work through this together. I shook my head. I need time to think, to figure out if there's even anything left to save. Right now, I can't be here. I can't be around you. Jessica nodded reluctantly, tears slipping down her cheeks. Okay, if that's what you need, I'll give you space. But, Eric, please, don't give up on us. I didn't respond. Instead, I packed a bag and walked out the door, leaving behind the life I thought I knew. As I drove to my brother's house, I felt a strange mixture of relief and heartbreak. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming control of my life, but the pain of Jessica's betrayal was still fresh, raw, and all-consuming. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. Things would never be the same. Staying at my brother's house felt surreal. I'd barely explained why I was there, only muttering something about needing space. Thankfully, he didn't press me for details, giving me the solitude I so desperately needed. The guest room became my sanctuary, a quiet, neutral place where I could try to process everything. But even in the silence, my thoughts screamed at me. Jessica's words replayed over and over in my head. Her excuses, her tears, her confession. I couldn't escape it. Every morning, I stared at my phone, expecting a message from her. And every day, without fail, one would come. I miss you. I'm so sorry. Please, Eric, let's talk. I couldn't bring myself to respond. What could I even say? I wasn't ready to forgive her, but I also couldn't shake the part of me that still cared about her. One evening, about a week after I'd left, my brother knocked on the door. You've been holed up in here for days, he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I don't know what's going on, but you look like hell, Eric. Maybe it's time to talk about it. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. It's Jessica, I admitted. His brow furrowed. What happened? I hesitated, the words catching in my throat, but then they spilled out. All of it. The party, Brad, the lies, the betrayal. By the time I was done, my voice was hoarse, and I felt like I'd run a marathon. My brother sat in stunned silence for a moment before letting out a low whistle. Man, that's rough. I'm sorry, Eric. You don't deserve that. Yeah, I muttered, staring at the floor. But now I don't know what to do. Part of me wants to leave and never look back. But part of me, I trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence, still loves her, he said, finishing it for me. I nodded, hating how true it was. He clapped a hand on my shoulder. Look, I can't tell you what to do, but you need to figure out what you want, not what she wants or what anyone else thinks. Take your time. Just don't let this eat you alive. His words stuck with me as the days turned into weeks. Jessica continued to text me, though her messages became less frequent. Then, one day, she called. I stared at her name flashing on my phone, my heart pounding. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but something compelled me to answer. Hello? I said, my voice guarded. Eric, she said softly, relief evident in her tone. Thank you for picking up. I know I don't deserve it, but I need to say this. I didn't say anything, letting her continue. I've been seeing a therapist, she admitted. I know it doesn't undo what I did, but I realized I can't fix us, or myself, without help. I've been trying to understand why I made the choices I did, and I want to be better. For me. For you. For us. Her words caught me off guard. Jessica was never one to admit fault, let alone take steps to change. I don't know if it makes a difference, she continued, her voice trembling, but I want you to know I'm not giving up on us. I'll wait as long as it takes for you to decide what you want. Just, please don't shut me out forever. Her vulnerability stirred something in me, but I wasn't ready to let her off the hook. Jessica, I appreciate what you're saying, but it's not that simple. I need time to figure out if I can even trust you again. I understand, she said quietly. Take all the time you need. When the call ended, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, and the faintest flicker of hope. Maybe she was trying to change. Maybe she was sincere. But could I ever move past what she'd done? That weekend, I found myself driving past our house. I don't know why. I wasn't planning to stop or go inside. I just wanted to see it. When I pulled up, I saw Jessica sitting on the porch, her head in her hands. She looked so small, so unlike the confident woman I had fallen in love with. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt, wondering if I'd been too harsh. But then I remembered the betrayal, the lies, the photos. I drove away without stopping. Weeks passed, and the silence between Jessica and me became less painful. I wasn't ignoring her texts anymore, but I wasn't rushing to respond either. She had shattered my trust, and no matter how many apologies she sent or how many therapy sessions she attended, I knew that rebuilding what we had wouldn't be easy. But something strange happened as time went on. I started feeling lighter. The weight of anger and betrayal that had consumed me began to fade. I realized that while Jessica's choices had broken us, I still had a choice in how my story ended. One evening, as I sat in my brother's backyard watching the sunset, I made my decision. It was time to move forward. I met Jessica at a quiet cafe near our home. She looked nervous, her fingers twisting the napkin in her lap. "Thank you for meeting me," she said softly. I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Jessica, I've spent a long time thinking about us, about what happened. And I've realized something. I don't want to live in the past anymore." Her eyes filled with hope. "Does that mean?" I held up a hand. "It means I forgive you. Not because what you did was okay, but because I don't want to carry this anger anymore. I refuse to let it define me." She swallowed hard, nodding. "I understand. And I'm so sorry, Eric. I can't change what I did, but I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that I've changed, if you'll let me." I looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't the same person who had dismissed my feelings and lied to my face. She had done the work, on herself, on understanding the damage she'd caused. "I'm willing to try," I said finally. "But we don't go back to how things were. We start fresh. As two people willing to rebuild, brick by brick." Tears slid down her cheeks, But this time, they weren't tears of guilt or fear. They were tears of relief. "I'd love nothing more than that," she whispered. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't easy. Trust wasn't restored overnight, and there were moments of doubt. But as time passed, I saw the effort Jessica was making, not just in words but in actions. She was transparent, communicative, and, most importantly, patient. We went to counseling together. We learned how to communicate in ways we never had before. And slowly, painfully, we began to heal. One evening, as we walked along the beach, Jessica reached for my hand. For the first time in a long time, I didn't hesitate to take it. "This feels different," she said, squeezing my fingers. "That's because it is," I replied. "This time, we're doing it right." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. Maybe love wasn't about being perfect. Maybe it was about making mistakes, falling apart, and choosing to fight for what truly mattered. And this time, we were fighting for something real.